Welcome to the Key of Imagination. This week we're going to be looking at the Twilight Zone episode, The Mighty Casey. We'll talk about whether or not this is the future of sports. We'll dive into the differences between machine logic and human logic. And I'll reveal my moment of awe, which has to do with a certain New York baseball team and how they often leave me in awe. So, grab your keys and let's open up this door to the fifth dimension. You unlock this door with the key of imagination. The Hoboken Zephyrs are a baseball team on the rise. Why? Well, because they're literally the worst team in the majors and there's really nowhere else to go but up. For the ball club manager, McGarry, he's at his wit's end with the amount of talent that he has to work with. So when the team holds an open tryout for new talent, he's less than enthused by the results. That is until Casey shows up. Young, tall, and strong as an ox. When Casey takes the mound, he puts on a show that no man has ever done before. And actually, no man has ever done before. For you see, Casey is a robot, built by Dr. Stillman. But McGarry doesn't care. All he sees is the opportunity to win. All that's necessary is a contract and the understanding that this will be our little secret. Everything works to plan and nothing can touch Casey when he's on the mound, except for a ball off the bat of an opposing hitter that bops him on the head. When Casey is checked over by the team physician at the hospital, the secret's out, and the baseball commissioner rules that Casey can't pitch. You see, a man has a heart, and since Casey has no heart, he isn't a man. But just when his teammates need him the most, Casey arrives at the ballpark, and with a new ticking heart to match. But something's wrong. Hit after hit, the other team is crushing every pitch that he throws. When the game's over and McGarry asks him, "What happened, Casey?" the pitcher confides in his manager that he simply doesn't have the heart to strike out the men on the other team. The Mighty Casey is directed by Alvin Ganzer, at least mostly. Robert Parrish came in at the end to finish it up and do it again. I'll talk more about that in my episode tidbits section. The teleplay is by Rod Serling. As for our cast, we have Robert Sorrells as the Mighty Casey, Abraham Sofair as Dr. Stillman, and our old friend Jack Warden, whom you might remember from the Lonely episode, as the manager, McGarry. The episode first aired on June 17th, 1960. As for our tidbits, this comes from our old friend Martin Grams Jr. I mentioned just previously this production had two directors, Alvin Ganzer and Robert Parrish, both of whom were incredibly skilled directors at this point for the Twilight Zone. You see, what happened was, Cayuga Studios, which is Serling's production company, originally cast the actor Paul Douglas to play McGarry. But Douglas was not looking well on film. Some believed that it was because of heavy drinking, but as it turns out, he passed away only 2 weeks after the primary filming was done due to heart complications that seemingly had no connection to drinking. Serling and producer Buck Houghton had a problem on their hands. They didn't want to release the episode because the performance was quite poor by Douglas, and they didn't want to besmirch his good reputation after his passing. But the CBS network, which had a 50% stake in the Twilight Zone, did not want to reshoot the episode for monetary reasons. Serling stepped up and paid the difference for director Robert Parrish and actor Jack Warden to come out and reshoot the episode. You know, it would have been easy for Serling to just kind of let the episode air and then move on. I say that because the very next week, it would have been essentially buried by a new episode. Today, you can't really bury content anymore. It's kind of always there, searchable. So the fact that Serling still paid the difference out of his own studio's pocket is yet another example of the fact that he had a good understanding of the relationship between money and humanity. Now, not everyone is in a position to be able to do so, to do what Serling did. But if we can, we ideally should. As for my initial thoughts, I know this episode is again not really an incredibly well-liked one. But I honestly don't hate it. I find it to be a perfectly adequate episode. You know, it's funny, my initial thought after watching this episode the first time was that it was more entertaining than I had remembered. I kind of found myself no better or worse off than when I had begun my watch, which is, again, just fine with me. In my rating section, I'll talk a little bit more about some of the potential issues that I have with it. But I pretty much left my initial rewatch of this episode in a very neutral space. Question 1. Is this episode giving us a glimpse of the future of sports? Each semester for the past few years, I have my students do a group project where I make them research, critically analyze, and then present their opinions on the current trajectory of technology and their overall level of comfort with where they see it going. My goal is very straightforward. I'm not interested in telling my students what to think. I'm interested in telling them to think about these topics, to force them to face the fact that there are likely big changes coming their way, and they should start the process of thinking about those changes right now, so that they're not caught off guard. I think this question about the future of sports is a valid one for us to start considering. So let's do it. But first, let's begin by breaking down an important scene from our episode, namely Casey's tryout. Casey's first time on the mound pitching for McGarry is a bit of an odd scene. In some ways, I think we might even call it a highly problematic one by the end of our analysis. Okay, you might already be thinking at this point, I'm taking what is a pretty goofy scene a bit too seriously. But, let me lay out for you why I think it's an important one for us to evaluate. So Casey begins by just taking a few warm-up pitches. Now, why does a robot need to warm up? I have no idea. But after a few warm-ups, he starts to get serious, and he showcases his top 3 pitches. First, he throws a fastball. We can hear it whooshing through the air, and then we see smoke coming from the catcher's mitt. Then, he throws a curve that seems to go all over the place, back and forth over the screen. Finally, he throws his slow ball, a kind of changeup, I assume, which actually reminded me of a pitcher named Orlando Hernandez, better known as El Duque. He would throw a pitch called the ephus pitch, and it would essentially come out of his hand at about 55 to 60 miles per hour, which is a lot slower, than Major League Baseball hitters are used to, and actually sometimes it would work, and a hitter would swing at it and just miss. So, okay. What's the problem with these pitches? It's clear that Serling is having a bit of fun, a la Bugs Bunny style, with the character. The sound effects all indicate that this is pretty much a gag. But it's not funny. And not because it isn't a joke, but because it establishes that Casey has abilities that defy normal levels of competition, and even to a degree normal levels of human physical capabilities. Additionally, there's a comment during the sequence that is so easy to miss if we aren't paying attention. It comes from Dr. Stillman, Casey's creator. When Casey throws the slow pitch, the doctor looks at his watch and he says, "He's a bit late." Now, that's fascinating to me because it means that something external, a variable, has impacted Casey's ability to perform at his expected automaton levels. In other words, there are limitations to this mechanical Superman, and that's important for our conversation. Let's get a little deeper into Casey's actual performance on the mound when it counts. So what we know about Casey's pitching prowess comes through the form of a montage. At the beginning of the montage, he does something that, again, if we aren't careful and if we're not familiar with baseball, is easy to miss. He shakes off the catcher's signals. What that means is, so the catcher will call for a certain pitch to be thrown, a fastball, let's say. Casey shakes his head to say, "No, I would rather throw something else." That logic indicates that Casey knows that it's important for him to throw the correct pitch or he can give up a hit, which is not all that different, of course, from every other pitcher who has ever done it. I myself once gave up 3 home runs in 1 inning. I mean, it was cool because one of them hit a house. Well, I guess it's a good story, but it's not a good story for me. Casey recognizes that there's at least a surface level of potential competition that he has to be concerned with. And if you watch the newspaper headlines, it never says anything about Casey striking out 27 batters and pitching a perfect game. He throws 3 shutouts in a row, which simply means he didn't give up any runs over the 3 starts. And another headline says that he strikes out 18 batters in a game. Okay, don't get me wrong. Any baseball fan would take a pitcher who could routinely do all of that. But he struck out 18, which means that there must have been some hitters who were able to make contact against him or get on base and possibly even score a run or two. So he can be hit. A fact corroborated, of course, when he actually gets hit in the head by what we can presume to be is a hard line drive up the middle. So what does this mean for our question? At the heart of the issue here is competition. As humans, we pride ourselves on winning, on developing cultures of success. We tend to look down upon or even dismiss sometimes people and institutions that do not win. So with that kind of scenario in place, we know why the manager is willing to try and get a competitive advantage here. But something that we unfortunately don't talk enough about anymore is thinking about the longevity and viability of our sports institutions. If you take this episode seriously and actually think about what it would be like for a team to have such a pitcher as Casey, you might marvel at it for a game. And you might even find yourself still somewhat enthralled the second time you saw him on the mound. But by the 3rd or 4th time, when you realize that his talents are quickly moving beyond anything that a human being can achieve, well, then it's no longer a competition. It's an exhibition. And that's not what we're signing up for when we watch sports. Not really. I think we're starting to touch upon an important part of our question about the potential future of having robots participate in sports. If the gap in talent is too wide, there's no reason to watch because it's not competitive. But what if the robot has a talent cap placed upon it? Again, taking as a point, Casey. Think about it. From his tryout scene, he can throw a pitch that creates fire. He can make a ball dance for 10 feet all over the place. If you actually had such a pitcher, he probably would throw perfect game after perfect game. So the fact that he doesn't pitch that way must mean that there is, in some respects, a kind of talent cap on him. Is that enough? Would that be enough for you to watch robots play sports autonomously against humans? Well, at least we're a long ways off from it ever happening, right? Right? It turns out that Toyota created an AI robot that it believes can eventually take the place of NBA basketball players someday. Their prototype is called Q, and it's a 6'10" robot with a whole bunch of sensors and cameras, and it's quite the amazing shooter. In fact, it's in the Guinness Book of World Records for hitting 2,020 free throws in a row. Impressive? Well, yes and no. Okay, yeah, I hear you. Joe, you're a hater. Yeah, fine, that's okay. All right. Listen. Yes, the creation of the robot is an impressive human feat, as in, I'm impressed by the humans who made it. But I'm not as impressed by the machine itself. And because I'm feeling, a little bit more ornery than usual, I'm just going to add the following. I'm not that impressed necessarily about the record of it hitting 2,020 free throws in a row. Because, although it's fascinating, the next robot will be able to likely do the same thing as well. So, what is there to be excited about? Look, my first college degree is in computer science. I still program on the side, so I'm very much in awe of how far we've come from punch card programming to someone creating a real robot that can play basketball. But, and here's the difference, that's not sports to me anymore. That's engineering. When I was younger, I would get upset when my teams lost. But now I'm actually more interested in just watching the human elements of sports play out in front of me. This might make me sound like an old man screaming at the sun, but I have to be honest. If this is the future of sports, you can probably count me out. I'm interested in what the human being can achieve when pushed to their limits. It might be cool to see Casey pitch, and maybe even to step up to the plate against him. But if he's throwing curves with 10-foot breaks on them, we might as well all just pack up the equipment and, yes, I'm taking my ball with me and going home, in petulant human defiance. Question 2. How does this episode showcase the differences between machine logic and human logic? This episode actually has one of the more fascinating exchanges between man and robot in the Twilight Zone. Just prior to Casey going out to pitch his first game, McGarry says to him, "Now above all, kid, don't be nervous." To which Casey replies, "Nervous?" And Dr. Stillman chimes in to let Casey know that it means ill at ease. Then McGarry gives a hypothetical scenario of thinking about pitching in the bottom of the ninth with 2 out and Joe DiMaggio coming to the plate, looking intent. And here's where it gets interesting. Casey says, "Oh, that wouldn't make me nervous. I don't know anyone named Joe DiMaggio." If you think about this exchange on a surface level, it seems pretty normal, pretty human. Take me, for example. I'm not a big soccer fan. So if someone tries to tell me that I shouldn't be nervous about this penalty kick I'm about to take against Allison Becker, even though he looks really focused, that might not mean that much to me because I don't know who that is. Yes, I had to look up really good soccer goalies, and yes, I just picked Allison Becker. Let it never be said that I'm not a man of culture. There is what we might call a kind of Socratic logic here. You might have heard people mention Socrates through Plato's Apology, saying something along the lines of, "I know nothing," or "I know that I know nothing." To be honest, I think people take Socrates' idea here a bit too far. His real point in making that claim is to showcase that he is at least aware of and willing to admit that of the things in which he does not know, he is ignorant. As opposed to, people who say, talk about things like soccer in their shows, having never played it nor watched more than about 2 minutes of YouTube clips. To be fair to me, I've never had a problem telling someone that I'm ignorant about something. In fact, of the things in which I am stupid, I am the stupidest. That didn't come out as Socratically cool as I thought it would. My point is this. It might seem on the surface that Casey is utilizing a kind of Socratic approach to knowledge here, and thus a rather human one. But that doesn't completely hold up under human logical scrutiny. The reason why Socrates is making this grand statement is because he's fully aware of the fact that most of the time the sophists at his time and human beings in general are all too ready to come up with all kinds of feelings, presuppositions, and uninformed opinions on why we should think a certain way. We have to actually work sometimes harder as a species to not jump to conclusions and fall prey to things like confirmation bias and cognitive dissonance. The difference being that built into human logic is not simply logic itself, but the complex social performance part of being a human being, of being a part of a collective culture that has its own set of norms and current cultural milieu that can sometimes dictate whether we can rely on pure logic or instead recognize that a kind of human logic is more fitting. Additionally, there's something else that I want to address here in terms of machine logic versus human logic, and why human logic sometimes makes more sense. The big Twilight Zone twist in this episode is that Casey receives a heart, and because he now feels empathy, he can't get himself to continually strike out the men on the other team because it hurts their careers. This is another example of where these two logical worlds, I think, don't quite meet up perfectly. By not striking the men out, he's obviously hurting his own teammates as well. So wait a second, how did we as humans achieve an equilibrium for this scenario? Well, we created what we call the spirit of competition. Think about it. We say, in the spirit of competition, I'm going to try and rip your head off. In the spirit of competition, I'm going to run right through you. In the spirit of competition, I'm going to eat his children. Yes, I loved me some Iron Mike Tyson growing up, but I will say that one probably went too far. Through human logic, we figured out a way to be competitive, aggressive, and even downright destructive at times while maintaining the dignity of the human experience. But that came from thousands of years of failures and successes, and you can definitely say that we're still trying to figure that out sometimes, the exact lines of when competition goes too far. Nonetheless, AI or robots have not learned that, and I'm not sure that they ever will be able to do so. So, what this episode in an odd way is exposing is that we often praise pure logic, and with good reason, but as even the great Spock from Star Trek would sometimes have to admit, it might be illogical, but there is something fascinating about us humans and our particular brand of logic. Question 3. What are your moments of awe? My moment of awe actually came right at the beginning and the end of the episode. Serling's monologues have echoes in them of the Brooklyn Dodgers, who were a much-beloved baseball franchise in New York until they went to the West Coast in 1958 to become the Los Angeles Dodgers. My grandfather was a Brooklyn Dodgers fan, my father a brief one until the Dodgers left, and then both of them became Mets fans. And that's where I find myself today, a third-generation New York Mets fan since the early 1980s. My moment of awe came when I began to think about the etymology of the word awe again. You see, it's Norse originally, I believe, and it means to be afraid of something to the point of a kind of reverence. Now that still tracks today. You see something that is vast, bigger than you are, something that inspires a kind of deference to your existence and takes hold of your senses. So the original use was really a little bit more toward explaining the horror that we feel when we see something. It's then that I realized that everything in my life has led to me being a fan of the New York Mets. The playoff run the Mets had last year was magical, and I think when it came down to us against those former Brooklyn bums out in LA, I'm pretty sure the larger baseball community was rooting for us to win. Baseball season is about to begin again pretty soon. Maybe we have a good year this year, and maybe we lose 100 games. That's the beauty of being a Mets fan. Either way, I'll be left in awe, wondering, how the heck did that happen? As for my rating, I'm going to give this one a middle-lower tier. I don't hate the episode at all. I do think there were opportunities, however, to explore more interesting sci-fi scenarios and ethical concerns. And as much as I enjoyed the win one for the Gipper speech, I think that could have been cut to make some room for those other conversations. That being said, I find it to be a perfectly serviceable episode that I would leave on in the background during a marathon while I was trying to recreate a Taj Mahal out of a plate of nachos. Hey, that's a bigger compliment than you might think. Next time, we'll be taking a look at A World of His Own, and here are your questions to consider when watching the episode. Question 1. Should we be focusing more on Mary in this episode? Question 2. Is Gregory a kind of Twilight Zone god? And question 3. What are your moments of awe? Now, I've got a couple of comments to highlight here from the YouTube channel. I love when people find connections to other shows or movies between actors in the Twilight Zone. Anita Richmond 8930 made the following connection with an actor from the Mr. Beavis episode. Henry Jones is a particular favorite of mine. His performance in The Bad Seed, where he played Leroy, helped to make that a must-see movie in our family. Anita, I don't think I remember having seen that movie, so you've inspired me to want to see it. Or maybe see it again if I just completely forgot that I had seen it. As always, thanks for the time and welcome to the community. Elmer Medina 1713 expressed well what is I think a lot of people's frustrations with the ending of Mr. Beavis. I found Mr. Beavis to be quite odd, not because of his eccentricities, but rather his willingness to remain homeless and jobless. He could have had the angel allow him to keep his way of life, but with a new Rickenbacker, keep his job, and his apartment. Elmer? I think that pretty much sums it up well for me as well. Without being too critical, again, I can't imagine the stress that Serling was under to come up with a new episode every week. I do think there could have been, a more carefully constructed middle ground here with Mr. Beavis, or go the complete extreme route and just remove the guardian angel completely at the end so that Beavis is really truly on his own. Either way, it's a great point, Elmer. You can continue our conversations by heading over to our Discord server and either starting a conversation about this episode or taking part in one that is already happening. The link to join the server should be in the episode notes section. You can also head over to thekeyofImagination.com where you can rate this episode, learn more about me, watch previous episodes of the show, and check out my Curios page where I showcase some of the Twilight Zone trinkets I've bought over the years, just like this wonderful sign, Earth creature in his native habitat that I got as a present from my wife. I encourage people to email me thoughts and comments, whether it's about a particular Twilight Zone episode, your rating for an episode, or about the Key of Imagination show. You can get those to me as a text email, an audio clip, or even a video clip of roughly no more than 5 minutes to keyofimaginationShow@gmail.com. Keep in mind, even though we talk about some serious topics, we're trying to maintain as family-friendly of an atmosphere as we can. If you would rather I not use your comments on the show, please indicate that so I can respect your decision. If you enjoyed the show, I ask that you please take a moment and do one, if not all, of the following to help build our community. Rate the show, review the podcast, leave comments, thumbs up, all of the usual algorithmic gymnastics that will help get the show in front of more people and help us build our community of Twilight Zone fans. However, even if you do none of that, and you absolutely hated every minute of this, I would still like to thank you for spending some time with me. Until next time, remember, all doors are open to those who possess the key of imagination.